Okay, so we're going to take a minute in the course of building this blowed out 300 Norma that we're working on. We're going to talk about a couple of the things that I see again flippantly thrown out on the internet that a lot of you are going to find you're going to have trouble achieving. Concurrent with this, I'm working on a bunch of 50 BMG projects, as you know if you're interested in that side of it, and I'm working on some subsonic 50s. And through the course of these builds, I talk about brass life, I talk about ES, and I pick on SD. And I've decided it's time to talk a little more about those things. For one thing, it's been a while since I've explained why SD is useless in the real world. Unless you're the kind of person whose competition exists in a world where accuracy isn't very important. What I mean by that is there's cross-course guys and there's service rifle guys and there's guys that stand on their hind feet and bark at the moon and shoot 50 rounds into something, and they get a big pattern, and maybe the pattern is denser at the middle. For those guys where accuracy is literally 1 MOA or 3 MOA, there's a place for standard deviation because they live in a world of percentages. They shoot platforms that have very little inherent accuracy. But see, to me, I simply don't exist in that world. I'd be tempted to say, let's bring the match into 50 yards and let's just simplify. Let's use buckshot. And instead of taking 50 firings to flop down on your belly and peer over your bifocals, or 50 rounds to stand up and shake in the wind to prove that you can average better than the next guy, let's just do 5 rounds with shotguns and buckshot and average to the center, because that's not accuracy is what I'm saying. That's playing with numbers. And so I need to explain why I sometimes get accused of bad-mouthing, picking on, or why are you so dead set against X group of... I'm not. It's just that we all have to talk about something in particular, and I talk in particular about only one thing, accuracy. I just got off the phone with a barrel maker, new barrel. Somebody called me or texted me and said, hey, what do you know about such and such barrels? I said, nothing. I don't know. So I called them. Come to find out, they make and have been making barrels for inaccurate platforms for many years, and their barrels come out with a 1 MOA guarantee. Well, it's kind of enough. I'm going to order a couple of them and try them out and see if they're better than that. But they use 3/10 of an inch or 3/1000. I don't remember. Anyway, they talk about air gauging to a high standard. And Douglas is the only other company that talks in terms of air gauging. Douglas makes a good barrel. So anyway, these guys are new and I'll probably try them out. But what I heard was not really... I would never say their name or badmouth them or anything. The only thing that I will do is I might try the barrels out, and if they shoot spectacularly well to 1/4 MOA or better, I'll say, hey, here's an alternative. They're available and they're cheap. But in the meantime, I need to be really clear. When I'm picking on something, like I say ES is all that matters and SD is not for me. It might work really well for the number crunchers, but I'm only... And one of the biggest differences is my focuses are on bench rest and on long-range hunting. For close-up hunting, 100, 200, even 300 factory offerings will suffice. Go buy the factory gun that catches your eye. Anything above and beyond that for hunting out to a couple hundred yards, is, unless your targets are the size of flies or fleas or something, there's really no reason to be all hung up on the accuracy paradigm. Why spend the money? But somewhere around 350, 400 yards, the paradigm starts to change. The requirements become more stringent. And beyond 500, 600 yards, the requirements become very stringent. The problem is, you're out there wading around in a world full of claims, and it's hard sometimes to separate the claims. I've used the term the wheat from the chaff. And now and again, I just have to call bullshit on some of this stuff, because it's like recently there was a guy shooting a 510 Whisper type platform, and he was saying, quarter MOA out to infinity. Well, after having shot these guns a lot and designing and building, I can call bullshit. Because I can say, unless you can take these factory rounds and get the ES in them down to under 10 feet per second, it's absolutely physically impossible to shoot the small groups that you're claiming. And I believe it's important for me to tell you why, when it looks like I'm bad-mouthing somebody or calling bullshit, it's only because there's a mechanism. There's a reason. And I'll show you in a minute, the way a group of rounds can be analyzed using extreme spread or standard deviation. And the standard deviation always looks a lot better. But, I mean, that's like airbrushing a corpse. It doesn't change the fact that not only is it possibly irrelevant, but that it can lead you astray. Another one that gets touted recently, I find this hilarious because up until recently, everybody just said you throw your cases away after 10 rounds. And that doesn't matter if you're a bench rest shooter and you throw it away after every match, or if you're whatever you are. But in the last number of years, the idea that brass can be fired 30 times, 50 times, 100 times has kind of exuded into the atmosphere around accuracy shooting. So people start throwing this out there the same way they throw out, oh yeah, my gun will shoot quarter MOA forever. That has to be backed up with fact. I went up to the house because I'm finally sending off the reamer prints to PTG to get this 300 norm up and running. Had a long conversation with them, and I'm eating some snacky and watching some Tube, and I keyed on this guy who has just come up with a new Wildcat cartridge. And it's so funny because this new Wildcat cartridge is a PRC necked up to 7, and it's all wildcatty like that, and there's no appreciation for the fact that all this is a shortened 404 Jeffrey. There's so many iterations of this, but during the course of this, he talks about two things that are required in this situation. One's a 40-degree shoulder angle, so that you can fire the rounds 50 or 80 times. Well, here's where I'm again going to call bullshit. You can't take a 404 Jeffrey case and neck it down to 7mm with a 40-degree angle and resize those things over and over and get that brass to last 50 rounds. It can't happen. In my experience. And there's reasons why it can't happen. And maybe we'll talk about that. That's one of the reasons that I brought up the Hellbringer case, which is a 30 caliber case on the 404 Jeffrey in a 35 degree, and it has to do with the length of the shoulder. I'm currently building this 300 Norma, and it's a fatter case. It's more important that we do the 35 degree shoulder, because a 40 degree shoulder on that big, huge Norma Lapua case, it's going to be even harder to get the resizing effect to work. And maybe one of these days I'll draw pictures, but I don't have time today. Suffice it to say that when you're collapsing the sidewalls of a case, it tries to extrude forward, and then you're capturing the shoulder and you're trying to push it back, and you're resizing the neck and you're resizing the base. All these things need to clamp together at the same time. The perfect situation would be a fitted collet die that would firmly grasp that case and just squeeze it on all dimensions. A half a thou. A thou. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist, although there is something out there that's close to that. It just doesn't do, so far, exactly what I need it to do. So, with sizing dies, we have to make everything touch down. And in the ordering, I've also been speccing out the sizing die reamer as I'm speccing out. Actually, I lied there. I talked about, or I thought about ordering up a sizing die reamer along with this, but I'm not gonna. I'm gonna have somebody. I just called 2 more die companies today to see if there's any reason to pursue a couple of others, and found out they don't do custom dies. So I will stay on my track to do Widden. So I will just order out a chambering reamer, and we will get Widden dies built for it, because he does just fine. But it's so funny because I'm talking to this guy and he's talking about PRC cases based on Ruger 375 case, and he thinks this is historical. No, it's not. It's a 404 case. It's a 404 Jeffrey case, the same thing all the Ultra Mags are built on. And the result at 7mm is a shoulder that is long enough that if you drop it down to 40 degrees and you try size it, it's going to start pushing the roll of where the shoulder rolls into the case body. It's going to push it down, it's going to stay there, and the part in closer to the neck is going to bounce and it's going to pop back out. So by the time you can get that round in there, you've been bumping, and the case is going to grow through resizing. During the course of this mess, he's talking about all of his custom stuff. He starts talking about brass flow, and he makes these moves, how when you're firing, that brass is flowing up and around those shoulders. And his 40-degree shoulder angle slows that brass flow down, because it's like it hits that corner and can't go around and get that body brass. Just a garbled up mess of an explanation. Brass doesn't flow. Let's just start with that. Can't. Stupid idea. Absolutely retarded idea. Brass cannot and does not flow. Brass gets jammed up into the die, and wherever you jam it up and reset stuff, it stays there. And you just keep pumping that brass up through the die like squeezing toothpaste out of a tube and cutting the end off. And that's what's called brass flow. So I got a little off to the side here, but I'm trying to, during the same course of this, the sales pitch that they've got for this new, whatever it is, neck down cartridges, that those 40-degree shoulder angles produce. And here's where things get really out in the weeds, but nobody calls on this because they don't think they can understand. They talk about how the 40-degree angle in the wide spread out case produces somehow superior internal ballistics to the old case design. That's essentially a paraphrase of the exact. In other words, if this case and that case both hold the same amount of powder, let's say this new case holds just as much as a neck down 30-06. Let's say it holds this, it's like a 270. Let's compare the 270 to this new 7mm case, since there's not much known out there for 7mm 30-06s. But somehow it's thrown out there as though it's established fact that the shape of the box that holds the powder somehow changes or increases or decreases efficiency. Well, let me just use my word. Bullshit. Does not. Doesn't matter. The shape can be, it could have a round ball full of powder. None of this stuff matters. The stuff that matters is making good, straight cases which control vibration, and maintaining those same cases. That's and all in the interest of producing accuracy. And there's a few things we have to talk about with accuracy in the quarter MOA thing that we're striving for here. There are no flyers. Flyers don't exist. Called shots don't exist. And I'm using this to illustrate why ES is important. I'm building this 300 Norma, and my 300 Hellbringers to test a new bullet, the 245 grain 30 cal bullet with a tight twist. Find out how this bad boy rambles out. We've got a accuracy parameter we want to hit. We've got a velocity parameter that we want to hit. It takes some things to do that. But understand something, if you're hunting, flyers can't exist. If you got a gun that shoots quarter MOA for 10 rounds and it throws one 2-3 inches out, a flyer, or even a half inch out at 100 yards, a flyer, that's not acceptable. Because the chances are then 1 in 10 that you're going to be holding on an animal, but the flyer is going to miss the animal, or worse, the flyer is going to wound the animal, even if you do your part. So flyers, excursions in accuracy want to be eliminated so that the gun itself will continue to meet an accuracy parameter and a velocity parameter. But the shape of the case has nothing to do with the velocity parameter, and the velocity parameter is described in 3 things: a stated velocity, an extreme spread, and a standard deviation. I'm going to blow down onto the paper here and show you how, some of my worksheets here, and I've got a paper that just kind of summarizes. I'm not going to show all the worksheets because I just want to summarize why ES and SD shouldn't be talked about in the same sentence. This is the beginning of a workup. There's 3 more pages of this, establishing SD on a range of rounds that go from 3250 to 3252, 3281, 3245, 3256. I started doing this and I said, you know what, there's no reason for me to hold this up and go, this is how you figure SD, because SD is BS anyway. All I want you to concern yourself with is the difference between extreme spread. Extreme spread includes the flyers of the velocity string. What most people don't realize is that their velocities vary on an average 50 feet per second in their loads. Their carefully, scrupulously handcrafted hand loads vary by 50 feet per second. This one here, I show how we've got a load at 3250, 3268, 3272, 3248, 3241, 3225. The extreme spread on this load is 47 feet per second. With a normal rifle, that becomes an issue out past 600 yards, 800 yards. We start getting this vertical dispersion that we can't do anything about because the velocity difference, and believe me, this is very common, 50 feet per second. Now, one of the things I found out with my suppressed project that I'm calling the fart, this becomes way more apparent because 10 feet per second equals an inch at 100 yards, which means that 10 feet per second equals 10 inches at 1,000 yards, making the gun pretty much unusable. So, now I can switch over to sectional density. I always do this, SD. Standard deviation, and I can make this number look a lot better. And for some people, this is one of my, I started to draw in here. For people who are shooting groups that are, there's maybe 20 shots and the guy keeps shooting and he keeps shooting and he keeps shooting and he keeps shooting and he keeps shooting, and like I said, he's standing back and he's wobbling in the wind and he's bang, 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 and he's getting pointed. And he shoots 20 times or 30 times or 50 times or whatever. And he gets this group that's 10 inches, 12 inches, 14 inches across, and he's adding up numbers, and at the end of the day you add up all the numbers and you come up with a score and you win or lose. This note down here says there are no flyers, called or uncalled, because these same groups of people are likely to say, oh, I pulled that one out to the right, and only to find out it's right in here. But if they want to, this is the kind of competition where I'm like, well, why don't you just sit back and take 5 shots with a shotgun, average out same thing, and guesstimate who won with numbers. Because the shots, but what I'm looking at is I want to see shots like this, quarter minute, or by the same token, I want to be able to go out there and hit an animal in its kill zone. I don't want a shot over here maybe, or a shot over here maybe. I don't care about the statistics. Every shot, there are no flyers. Every shot is equally important. So right here, I'm dealing with hunting and bench rest, and we deal with extreme spread. And you'll notice that this standard deviation, and I'm not going to, I was going to get on here and show you how standard deviation is figured, but I chickened out. Just notice that it's always way more appealing. Even if you're down at 10 feet per second of extreme spread, you're at 3 point, and it depends on the distribution of the numbers in here. Basically, even though the extreme spread might be 40, that's your chances of hitting the animal or winning the bench rest match at long range. You can get your SD down around 11 because you only got 1 or 2 highs and 1 or 2 lows, and the rest in between are kind of clustering towards center. But if you're shooting bench rest for effect, or if you're hunting where every bullet counts, as opposed to one of these averaging games where everybody's just bang, 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 bang all over the place, and then you count them all up and find out more people tended to center. I don't care about these. This is why SD to me is useless, because when that big bull steps out at 987 yards, you've only got 1 shot. You don't want to be hoping it's somewhere in this distribution. No, we need to drop the distribution. We need to get the extreme spread lower, coupled with accuracy for repeatability reasons. You know, you throw enough rocks at a can and you're going to get a percentage of them into that can. But that doesn't mean that you're chucking rocks at a can is a good hunting load. So I want to just reiterate that the reasons I bring this stuff up, when I'm bad-mouthing SD, it's because it's of no use to what I'm doing. See, it's great for the guys that are shooting a service rifle 500 times in a weekend, but it's no good for somebody who has got 1 shot on an elk or 5 shots into a group that's going to be measured with an optical chronometer of some, not chronometer, optical, you blow it up and then you measure it with a micrometer. So anyway, just wanted to clarify my stance on SD and ES.